Everybody else coming, so why don't we go ahead and start. So a lot of our audience here consists of faculty and students from computer science. We also have a sponsored training program during the summer, so we have some undergraduates from around the country who have come for the summer to do some research, and 2 high school students as well who have been joining us. Our visitor today is, I'm going to give it the English pronunciation, Charles Consel, who is from Inria in Bordeaux, France, and he's going to be talking today a little bit about an assisted living platform for aging in place. So right in our wheelhouse. For those of you who have time this afternoon, and my students in particular, there's going to be time at 1:30 to talk with Charles about your research and to ask him more questions about his research. So I encourage you to attend that. That'll be in room 130 upstairs. And for now, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. So it's a great pleasure to be here. We'll talk to you about HomeAssist, which is this assisted living platform that we've been working on for aging in place. And I guess talking to Aaron, I realized that you guys have this multidisciplinary approach to this as well. So we have a lot to share, a lot in common. Okay, so I'll talk about assistive computing for cognition first. This is the heart of what we do in my group. And more specifically, we design, develop assistive computing systems for cognition to improve the autonomy and self-determination of users with cognitive impairments by providing a pervasive support for their daily activities. What's interesting is that, in fact, cognitive impairments haven't been really studied much in terms of delivering products to people that have those impairments. Yet 70% of people with impairments have cognitive impairments, and only 30% have motor and sensory impairments. And yet there's really little that's done for people with cognitive impairments. So, those figures actually were given to me by my colleague in psychology, and I was kind of surprised to see that. Okay, so what do? We target people with cognitive impairments or cognitive decline. So children with intellectual disabilities, Down syndrome, autism spectrum disorders, and older adults with cognitive decline. What we want to do is to compensate for their cognitive deficiencies, to assist them in their daily activities and also to enhance independence and well-being. The places where we want to bring our systems are any places where environmental demands will exceed the individuals' activities. So primarily we target home, work, and school. So we have a bunch of research questions that are at the crossroad of various disciplines like cognitive science, human factors, computer science, and health. And let me just share a few of those questions. So first, I guess I'm a computer scientist, and so when I started working in this field, I thought I could just, attack this field all by myself, thinking, I'm doing computer science, I can do everything. So I'm very powerful. In fact, I realized that it's a bit more complicated than that, and I really needed to team up with people from other disciplines. And so this is what I did, and realized that there were a lot of questions that went across those disciplines, like what are the specificities of the users that we want to assist? So as a computer scientist, I'm very technology-centered. But then when I do that, I am very much using a lot of stereotypes that we all have about certain populations. And we realize that every day when we look at computer systems that are supposedly targeting a specific population, we realize that they just use a lot of stereotypes that some of us or all of us use. And we really need to get down to the details of what are those people that we want to develop assistive technology for, and exactly understand what are their specificities. There can be variability inter individuals. There are things like what are the tasks that we want to provide technology for. Another thing that's interesting is how to reduce the cognitive cost of assistive computing systems. You know, there was a very interesting paper. The name, I'm not good with names, but that paper was talking about the cost of operating some technology, balancing that with the benefits. So if the cost of using this technology doesn't cover the benefits, then you have a user acceptance problem, and you have a user adoption problem for the technology. So acceptance, usability, adoption is a real problem, because we talk about technology for instance, for older adults, but actually very few assistive technologies have been adopted by those users that we're targeting. And also how to integrate the technology in the environment. I mean, when we think about something that is a pervasive support for our users, if it's pervasive, then we're going to have a problem to see how we integrate technology in their environment so that it won't be something stigmatizing or anything like that. So we want to bring this information over to the computer science side, for instance, regarding the specificities of the user. How can we make assistive computing systems sensitive to user specificities? That is, how can we express the kind of maybe constraints or requirements or kind of cognitive resources that are needed for the assistive technology to work well. Okay, and how can we make a match between what the users can do, his or her abilities and limitations, and what the assistive technology requires. Okay, making that match is really important. How can we make these systems context-aware, activity-aware? Other things like requirements to deploy a to deploy in a naturalistic setting. So sometimes we see. So this is interesting because we're at a point where we start submitting papers, and we realize that sometimes reviewers think, well, you know, do this experiment like we do in the lab. Well, the problem is that if we do that in somebody's home, okay, it's not a lab, and so the vision you have to design an experiment in a lab cannot be the same if you deploy your technology in somebody's home. Okay. Methodology to develop assistive computing systems. That's something that we've been working on. Guarantees to ensure. Of course, you know, don't want the technology to harass your user, for instance, and how to minimize the impact of the technology. And this actually goes back to this cognitive cost as well. So on the health side of things, we look at you know, how can we have evidence-based, how can we measure evidence-based effects of assistive computing systems for rehabilitation, health, well-being. I know you're working on similar topics. So screening purposes, I mean, you've worked on that. I've seen one of your papers talking about that for people with Alzheimer's disease. Well, can it delay the cognitive decline? I mean, can we somehow stimulate the users and delay their cognitive decline? And also everything that has to do with scaling up assistive computing, scaling up to population-based cohort studies, for instance. Like large cohorts, and see what that does to have very strong statistical results. How can we combine technologies? I mean, this is a real problem. We're going to talk about that and I'll show you what the kind of things we do in order to have a way of combining many technologies without overwhelming the users. And also, of course, when we introduce technology, we're going to change the model of assistance because maybe there's some computer-based system that can cooperate with caregivers, and so the model of assistance may change actually because of the technology. So these are some examples of the questions that we are asking ourselves. So let me go into the research projects that we are doing in the group. So we're targeting 3 kinds of populations: older adults, adults with intellectual disabilities, and children with autism spectrum disorders and ID. The environments that we're targeting today are the school and the home. And so our goal is to provide cognitive support for the individual and their caregivers towards inclusion and or autonomy, and the method is assistance or training for daily tasks. Okay, the methodology goes this way. We do needs analysis, and also we analyze the tasks that we are targeting for assistance. We then define goals and assistive strategies. We use that to design and develop technologies. We do some lab validation like you do, and then we do in-situ deployment, and then we do some evaluation. This is more my colleagues doing that for things like well-being, autonomy, and health. Okay, so now let me dive into HomeAssist, our platform. So, what my colleague did was to do a very thorough analysis of the needs of older adults. So this platform is primarily for older adults. So she did a big survey of 500 profiles that were given to us by a national retirement organization in France. And she also conducted with her students 80 interviews of older adults, a very specific panel. And she came up with 3 domains where assistance was needed: social participation, home and personal safety, and daily activities. And let me give you a few applications, assistive applications that we developed to address those needs. One is for social participation. From the literature, we know that this is the foremost important domain of interest for the older adults. We developed a simplified email client to on a tablet to allow older adults to send email in a very convenient and simplified way. For home and personal safety, we developed applications that would monitor the door during the day or overnight, typically to make sure that the door doesn't stay open, or that there are no unscheduled departure at night. We have an assistive application for the monitoring the stove. We have one for a light path, for instance, to have a path of lights towards the bathroom. For daily activities, we have simple things like medication reminder, any appointment reminders. We also have something that has to do with meal preparation, meal reminders, and this is something that has to do with the verification of activities that I will talk about in a moment. So these are just examples of assistive applications that we have developed following the needs analysis that my colleague did. All right, so let me give you an idea of what this platform looks like. Here are the 3 types of sensors that we use in our platform. We have a motion sensor that does luminosity sensor and also temperature sensor. This is all Z-Wave technology. We have contact sensors of different size for doors or cabinet doors, for instance. And we have a smart switch here that measures the electricity that an appliance may be consuming. Plus, it can do on and off on the appliance. We have an online catalog of assistive applications because we believe that because of the intra-individual variability and inter-individual variability, we need to have a range of assistive applications that can adapt different needs. Okay. So we don't have a monolithic set of assistive applications. We have something that's modular, that somebody can have evolved over time and over creation of new needs. So it's essentially an app store kind of thing. And we have two tablets. One, I'll talk about this tablet, this main tablet, in a moment. But just for you to know, this main tablet is a main interaction point between the user and the assistive applications. So anytime an application has to tell something to the user, it goes through that tablet. It's a main tablet because it's stationary. Okay. Don't hesitate to ask questions if you, by the way. Okay, and we have the secondary tablet, which is more for social participation, and this is the tablet that goes everywhere in an apartment. It can be, it's not always charging, whereas this one is always plugged in and always with so we know it's always available. And we have, this is the Vera that I was telling you about. This is a Z-Wave gateway. Okay, so we don't deal with anything that has to do with the sensors and actuators. This is out of our platform. We use off-the-shelf technology for that. And we use that Vera box here that is a gateway that will allow us to operate those sensors. Okay. So let me now quickly talk about, so everything is on the cloud here, and we have essentially a virtual machine per home that we are operating. Let me tell you a little bit about DiaSuite Box here, which is a technology that we've been developing in my group for the past 7-8 years. There's been many students, like 7-8 students working on various aspects of that technology for their PhD. So we have developed a dedicated development environment to develop applications that orchestrate entities, whether software or hardware. Okay. This comes with a domain-specific design language that allows one to design an application prior to programming the application. So you design the application with a specific language we crafted. It generates a programming framework in Java, and then you can introduce your assistive logic or whatever orchestration logic in that framework. The point about this is because we have this design language, we can do some analysis on the kind of assistive applications that you're writing. So we can prove some properties and essentially ensure some behavior, okay, which is a key, because if you're controlling somebody's home, you really want to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And once you're done developing your application, you can push it automatically on our store, okay, and it becomes available for whoever wants. So we have this store where, as I was saying, you can select the assistive. I mean, the user or the caregiver can select the appropriate assistive applications for the needs of the user. Okay. We can do some application configuration. We can do some entity configuration, and we can all the networked entities and in fact also the networked services, because we use sensors and actuators like you saw, but we also use web services like a calendar or contacts and things like that. We deal with them in, we don't distinguish them actually, they are just functionalities for us. Okay.
Charles?
Yes?
What, are you going to talk about queue level?
Well, not specifically, but I can tell you a little bit about it. The idea is that when we design an application, we also think about the kind of queue levels that we want to provide the user with, depending on the level of assistance that we want to provide. So, and this is something that we configure at, once you download an application or upload an application in your home, then there are some configuration parameters that you have to set. And this is going to give you a kind of a level of queues that you will be provided with, depending on your needs. Okay. And here, for the selection of networked entities, the Q types is the kind of thing that you want to have. For instance, when you have a notification for something, you may have kind of multimodal coding of the notification information. Like, for instance, you can have something that's gonna some notification that will pop up on the tablet, but also you can have, say, a light, for instance, that you control. Okay, that goes with the notification, so that if you have some hearing problems, for instance, there's the light that's flashing in. So those are the kind of Q types and Q level that we think about. Okay, so going back to this architecture now, let me focus on the notifications. Okay. The reason why this is something very specific for us is that we thought, well, if we're going to provide many assistive applications to the user, it may get very confusing very quickly. Okay, so we need to kind of do some unification of things so that the user doesn't have to deal with many different assistive applications, but can have kind of a uniform view of all those assistive applications that the user has. Okay, so the reason why is because right now those assistive technologies are very much into some kind of a silo-based approach, where every piece of technology does something different. Okay, the more assistive needs you have, the more assistive technologies you have to acquire. Okay, the more assistive technologies you have, the more specific user interfaces you have to deal with. And the more specific user interfaces you have to deal with, the more cognitive load you have for operating those technologies. So that approach just doesn't scale up. There's some work that was published that says that, if I remember correctly, it's like an older adult can only deal with, I think, like it's 3 new technologies, before being overwhelmed. So there's only a certain number. I mean, just look at just yourself. I mean, if we are to install like 5, 10, 20 new technologies in your home, this may be confusing after a while, even though you may like technology. If it's in your home, it's very different. So we thought it would be interesting to have some kind of a unifying notification system that would unify the way assistive technologies talk to the user. Okay. So you can't unify everything, of course. So we kind of thought, okay, there are some task-specific interactions that we won't be able to unify in our framework. Forget about those. Those are kind of specific things you have to do. And you do them in a very specific way, depending on the purpose of the assistive technology. But there are things we can unify, and that's specifically the notifications. And in fact, the notifications is usually the common interactions that you're going to have with the technology. The thing that reminds you of doing something, or the thing that alerts you that you haven't done something. Okay, and this is what we want to unify. So we have this model for notifications that we've defined. We now have 2 types of notifications. We have critical notifications and non-critical notifications. So the idea is to make things very simple for the user. So we don't actually, this is inspired from avionics. They have, I think it's 5 types of notifications, but those are for pilots. They have, they are trained for that. We're talking about users that we don't want to train them specifically for our technology. It has to be as intuitive as possible. And so we thought 2 levels would be the simplest for them. And therefore we have 2 interaction protocols for those notifications. Essentially those are steps and behaviors that we are expecting from the user. I'll come back to that in a moment. Also, we use multimodal coding of notifications in order to simplify the kind of the decision making of the user, the decision making process for the user. Okay, and an interesting kind of side issue is So you're about to develop some assistive application, and there are some situations for which you want to send some notifications to the user. But then you're going to start thinking, okay, I want to alert the user of a certain situation. What should I do? Should it be a critical notification or a non-critical notification? And there you're going to think about, okay, what are the specificities of the users that I want to deal with there? Okay, what are their level of autonomy? What should I expect from those users? And you're going to make decisions because you're going to say, okay, if there's such situation, I think this may be an emergency kind of situation, and so I need to use the critical notification. Or if this is such situation, there's no emergency and it can be non-critical. So your problem then is to go from the notification design decisions to the actual assistive application and making sure that on the way nothing is lost. Okay, so we've designed some API that allows allows to essentially push those design decisions throughout the process of the development of the assistive application. So here's how it looks like, the main tablet. Okay, again, this is stationary, main point of interaction. When there are no notifications, it looks like a picture frame, okay, with a shared album. So what it means is that caregivers can, family members can actually post new pictures, and this is something that our users like a lot. Here, on a kind of a side issue, is that we have something that looks like a pause button, okay, and it is actually a pause button. It allows to pause the platform. If somebody has, for instance, visitors, okay, and they don't want to be bothered by the platform, then they can just pause this thing for an hour, 2 hours, or whatever. So this is the main tablet. When we have notifications, here's how they look. This is a non-critical notification. So it has a specific tone, okay, that the person can realize. This is the training part. They have to be trained to, okay, this tone is for a non-critical notification. There's a specific shape for the notification information and a specific color. Okay. The protocol is as follows. This rings, once or twice, and then if the notification is not attended to, it goes into a stack of notifications. Okay. So non-critical means if I don't attend to it, that's fine. There's no problem. And there's a stack of notifications, and people can go through this list and deal with them at the time that's convenient for them. Okay. We have the critical notifications, a different look, different color, different tone, different volume. Okay, and again, this is a way for them to make the distinction between something critical and something non-critical. And this is a key factor for user acceptance, as described in the literature for notifications. Okay, now the protocol is as follows. This is going to loop until the user attends to this notification. And after a while, it will actually, depending on how it's set up, it will actually contact a caregiver. Okay. So that's the interaction protocol for critical notifications. Again, it has the advantage that it's always the same behavior. So it's very predictable for our users. Okay. So any type of assistive applications you may have behind the scene, the user doesn't care. Okay, because whenever an assistive application wants to talk to the user, it follows those two protocols. Now, just on a side note, if you have something that already exists, that can work as well, because we essentially wrap an existing service, okay, with our API. So it's some kind of a device driver, if you wish, okay, for our approach. Okay. So we did a field study on this. 15 participants, 81 years on average. People living alone and with cognitive integrity. During 6 months, we asked them to perform time-based scenarios, critical, non-critical, every 6 weeks. And we collected user performance for effectiveness, learnability, user acceptance, and user satisfaction. And we had really great results. I mean, they learned very quickly. They are very effective in performing those scenarios, and great user acceptance and satisfaction. So I have the details, but I'm just skipping over those details. Now let me turn to some other piece of work that we have on activity verification. So I know you're working on activity verification, activity deduction or detection rather, and we took a different angle from usual activity inference that people do in the literature. Our goal, general goal, which I guess we're sharing with most people working on that, is making assistive applications context aware. Okay, this is really what we want, is to deliver the assistance in a very reliable way. Our angle is really to be as knowledge-driven as possible. That is, we want to leverage, essentially, as I said, the specificities of the population we are targeting. So I'm going to talk about the kind of activities we're interested in. I'm going to talk about routines and sensor placement. So we had this interesting conversation with Aaron about sensor placement. So you'll see that our work is really based on that. It really critically relies on that. And we have routine formulas that leverage this information. So let's talk about activities. So we're targeting older adults and self-care activities. So basic ADL and instrumental ADLs. What the literature tells us is that an individual aging is going to have a tendency to compile the steps of a particular task into a skill. Okay, so it has more and more routines essentially being executed every day. Okay, so and as somebody ages, the person is going to have more and more routines up to a point where, I mean, this is a way of optimizing cognitive resources. Okay, which for a computer scientist is very reasonable. I mean, when I read about this, with my colleague feeding me papers on this, it sounded very reasonable. I mean, that we optimize our resources. That sounds reasonable for a computer scientist, at least. And so up to a point where there can be a decrease. I mean, because essentially deviations from those routines when essentially you optimize up to a point where you can't anymore because you don't have the resources available. Other things we know about the way those activities are performed is that there's a single activity over a period of time. Multitasking is complicated after a while, after a certain age. And also those activities are situated in a specific room. Okay. So we leveraged that knowledge to devise our approach. So what we did was to do an activity analysis at the home of the users we wanted to equip with our platform, and we asked them to actually sketch each activity of interest. Okay, which actually makes a lot of sense because, I mean, if you start having routines, when we ask you to sketch some of those routines at your home, you do them the way you do them every day. So there's no mistakes. I mean, we haven't noticed any mistakes as we collected this information. So we asked them to do those activities, and we have a list of markers which we kind of note the list of markers, which is the points of interaction with the environment, like opening a drawer, starting an appliance, and things like that. Okay, and we annotate or we assess the certainty of those point of interactions, and also their uniqueness, because I mean you may be opening something, but maybe there are many reasons why you can open this thing, and so the uniqueness is an issue. And of course, those points of interactions have to be observable with the set of senses that we have. Okay, we have those three kinds of senses. That's all we have. So let me give you an example of markers for the breakfast preparation. So if somebody, for instance, drinks coffee, there's going to be a major, what we call a major marker, which is going to be the coffee machine. Okay. So you start in the morning. Usually you don't use the coffee you've done, the day before. You do start the coffee maker. You possibly take some milk out of the fridge, and you get a mug somewhere in a drawer or a cabinet. Okay. So this is going to be key information for us to place the senses. So we know about the sensor types we have. We have 3 sensor types. And then we're going to determine the locations for those. So for instance, making a coffee, we need a smart switch. We're going to equip the coffee maker with a smart switch. For taking the milk, we're going to have a contact sensor on the fridge. And we're going to get, for getting the mug, we're going to get a contact sensor on the cabinet door. Okay? And then from that analysis of this activity, we're going to define formulas that will assess whether or not this activity has been performed, or more specifically, that will verify whether this activity has been achieved. So the parameters we're going to use is the spatial context, so where things are happening, temporal context, the time of the day, and the duration, if necessary. And we're going to do this mapping between markers and sensors. So here's an example of a formula that we have for breakfast preparation. So we have this major marker here, which is a major marker is really something that whereby you think this activity, in order to perform this activity, I absolutely need to do this interaction with my environment. So a coffee machine or anything that is kind of a key thing for your breakfast preparation is going to be our major marker. And then there's going to be minor markers like the fridge or the cabinet, because the mug may be in a cabinet, but it can be in the dishwasher as well. So that's a minor thing. Okay. Or it can be out because of some other reasons. Okay, so you see that the weight are not the same, and then the time of the day is going to be a critical thing. Remember we have the temporal context. So it's either 0 or 1, depending on the time interval that you declared that you are preparing your breakfast. Okay. And then you're going to get a score between 0 and 1. Okay, that will appreciate whether or not, essentially saying, yes, you've done your breakfast, no, you haven't done your breakfast, with a threshold at 0.8. Okay, so this is what we use. Okay, we devise formulas like that for each activity, and we instantiate those formulas for every user. Okay, so same formula for all the users, we just instantiate them differently. Because somebody may prepare tea, for instance, it's not going to be a coffee machine or other things like that. So we adapt, we instantiate those formulas depending on the user, and that's the customized part of the process. Yes.
It seems that this is pretty highly dependent on happening at the time interval, because if you're outside the time interval, it zeroes it out. So
yes.
Have you looked at perhaps a closeness to the time interval so that you can still make coffee just 5 minutes outside the normal range or something?
Well, we have time intervals that are rather flexible. They're not short time intervals, rather large time intervals, and so the real question is, are people routinized or not? Because we're making hypotheses as to, we think, okay, this is what the literature tells us, is that people have routines as they age, they do things at specific time intervals during the day, and the real question is is this happening? I mean, is this work? Is this what you think it is? Is the literature right on this? Okay, and this is what we did in our experiment, because otherwise it's just pure speculation. I mean, it's pure speculation, yes and no, because there are some experiments described in the literature, but still we didn't know whether this was the case or not, for sure. Okay, I mean, it's one thing to hypothesize or maybe to have some theoretical work on this. It's another thing to actually get the actual data and realize whether or not this is working, this is the case. And this is kind of the ultimate thing. So we did that in an experiment. The hypothesis is daily routines of older adults can be automatically verified, and again, verified, not inferred. So we had 4 participants, 83 years old on average, living older adults living independently and alone with cognitive integrity. So alone because, of course, when you have multiple occupants, it's a mess. So we haven't solved that problem.
So were they living in their own homes, or
yes.
like not in assisted
their own
living or
home?
anything?
And it is a key because the routines can actually happen if they are in their home. So having that in a lab, that doesn't work because that's not their routines. So we collected 5 days of data, 5 weekdays, same set of sensors for every house, okay, with of course customized placements, okay. So we had sensor logs with sensor identifier, status change, and time step. By sensor identifier, we also had the sensor location, of course. I mean, it's a key here for us. We did some data analysis, so we used the signal detection theory for that. We randomly picked 30 sets of logs, and we had a human observer to actually play with our activity verifier. So essentially, our activity verifier would say something, and we'd compare that to the human observer. Okay? And results, very quickly, we found out that our method is very accurate, and there's no bias or slightly conservative, depending on the activity. But essentially, it works, okay, with actual data. So we didn't stop there, and this is some new results we have now, is that yes?
So the human observer was looking at the data, but not at what the participant was actually
That's
doing.
right, looking at the data. It was actually, he was a occupational therapist. Okay, trained to actually analyze tasks.
And when you are detecting the activity or when you assess accuracy, the question is whether you detect that they did indeed perform that activity, or is it at any given time of day to distinguish which activity they're currently performing? What is the question that you're...
What we want to know is whether or not this activity occurred.
Okay.
Okay. So the human observer takes the log of things and say, yes, that looks like breakfast preparation for me. Okay. And we take our formula and we run it and we see whether or not it's saying the same thing. Okay.
For
that particular activity.
Data.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So this was some work we published at Assets last year, and so we continued working on that topic. What we were interested, I mean, this was just a start, and we wanted to see whether we could generalize that idea to other activities. So we generalized it to preparation of all meals. Okay. We also included other activities like getting up from bed and going to bed. Okay. We wanted also to see if we could go further in terms of consistency. So we had, for each participant, we took 8 weeks of data, okay, of log data, and also 7 participants compared to before we had, 4 participants. And also we had interjudge reliability. We had 3 observers, okay, in this experiment. before we had just one human observer, okay, which, you may think, okay, is this reliable enough? Because if you pick that, that observer, what guarantee do I have that if you had more observers, maybe they don't agree with each other? Okay. So there we could see that they actually agree, which is a good news. So we can see that our methods work for over a long period of time. So it's pretty robust. It works well with different kinds of participants, and that's pretty robust for inter-individual variability. And that as far as human observers, they agree, the three of them. And so you'd say, okay, fine, that's good, but that's not the end goal. And the end goal is really to get those context-aware applications. So we took those data and we developed applications that we simulated on those data. We defined two applications. One was, what about a reminder of activities? So making sure that whenever somebody missed an activity, we want to remind this person that, oh, you need to prepare your lunch or your dinner or whatever, okay? And same thing for daily assessment to caregivers, okay, right? So what we did was essentially to run those applications on those log data, okay? And we analyzed how many notifications a real user would have had, okay, based on those data. And what's really great is that we're getting like very accurate notifications. So if we had run those two applications, okay, in those people's home, okay, it would have given something very accurate, not too many notifications, okay, so we have all those results that really are very encouraging, because essentially what this says is that, yes, it works, and it is not harassing the user. It's giving, it's saying whenever the person is skipping a meal, then it is, accurate to actually remind this person. Yes?
So did you see much difference over the 8 weeks? Because it seems like if you wait long enough, someone's routine is going to change. So they become lactose intolerant, they decide they like tea better than coffee, or they go into cognitive decline, in which case their routines are going to degrade.
So, again, remember, we're targeting older adults.
Right.
So they're, people that drink coffee will always drink coffee. They don't, so that's what we realized, like, on a practical level. That is, okay, we may speculate that people change their habits. We may speculate lots of things. What's interesting is that when we get the actual data, okay, so literature tells us you don't change your routines as you age. Reality tells us that indeed you don't change your routines as you age. Over 8 weeks. Over 8 weeks. Right. We don't have enough of longitudinal data to actually see cognitive decline. 8 weeks is, although the participants are 80 plus on average, over 8 weeks, it's good that we don't see that. Over 8 weeks it would be kind of unfortunate. So yeah, does this answer your question?
Yeah, I guess what I'm interested in is, if something changes, so you haven't seen changes, if something changes, could we detect a new routine versus cognitive decline?
Yes, so most definitely these are the issues that we are interested in looking into. Absolutely, absolutely. Yes.
If I may, I have one follow-up question about how the activity detection works. I'm trying to determine whether it would give you some false positives. So if I understand, you have some sensor data and your human judge looks at it and says they were cooking, and then you give it to the rule and the rule says yes, according to the score they were cooking. So did you ever try getting some sensor data that did not correspond to cooking, maybe it was washing dishes, and give it to the human judge and they said they're not cooking, but your rule would say yes, they are cooking because...
Okay, so it depends on the strength of your markers. So, for instance, at 8 o'clock, so if somebody declares, so again, remember that the people sketch their activities, okay, in front of us, okay. I mean, so we haven't seen one occurrence of somebody sketching something that isn't true. So that's interesting in and by itself, because, I mean, we weren't sure, but that's the case. We have never seen anybody doing something on our, sketching something that doesn't happen afterwards on the logs. Okay, so that's one thing that's important. So what it means is that when somebody declares something, it happens for real. Okay, which is, I mean, what you would hope. It's just, I mean, there are people that are volunteering, okay, for this experiment, so it wouldn't make sense that they would fake something. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that when they tell us that...
How are you having them do the sketching? Are you actually having them kind of go through the activity, or just...
More sketching. So they don't, they go and say, okay, when I do my coffee, I come here and I turn on the coffee machine, and, or I get my, get the coffee from here. And since they're at home, I mean, this is their routine, so there's no effort for them to, yeah.
But the tricky thing is that there could be quite a few things that look a lot like cooking, like washing dishes.
Of course.
You were saying that your rule has quite a bit of leeway in it for the time of day, for example. And I'm wondering to what extent the rule could be too general and call some things an activity when they're not.
Well, because, see, when they take breakfast, for instance, they're going to tell us, I take my breakfast between 7 and 9. Okay, so we say, okay, fine. So sometimes we go a little earlier, we go a little later, but to some extent, when you start your coffee, when you start the coffee machine at 12, okay, it's not breakfast you're preparing; it's something else. But if you start your breakfast, if you start the coffee machine on the morning, it is breakfast you're preparing. I mean, there's no other way. And I was more, to tell you the truth, I was actually more, I was questioning whether we would have good results on, breakfast is easy. It would be like lunch and dinner that I was most concerned about. And apparently it works. So we take we put sensors in the cabinets. We take, depending on the people, they have different routines. Like, for instance, some of them, they don't cook anymore. Okay, so they have prepared meals. Okay, and they use the microwave at a certain time of the day. Okay, they will use the fridge. You will have a presence. You will detect a presence in the kitchen at a very specific time of the day, and this is, all those indicators actually converge to saying, yes, there's meal preparation. And we haven't seen occurrences of people preparing a meal and not eating it. Okay.
Have you tried other ways of validating your data, like actually asking, like calling participants and asking them whether or not they just did this, or having an observer in the home for one day if things are pretty routinized? Like, have you tried any of that just to make sure that you're really capturing what you think you're capturing? No,
we haven't done that, because I mean that's the thing when you deploy something in somebody's home, is that
right. Well,
you don't want to be too intrusive. Yeah, it is a limitation to that extent. What we know is that out of the people that that are participating in our study, I mean they have caregivers, professional caregivers, coming to their home like every other day or something like that. So we work with these professional caregivers. Actually, it's through them that we are getting our participants. So if anything would have happened, we would have known it. I mean, they've been participating in our studies for a while now, and so of course we know them very well. And actually, we go to their homes at times to actually have use questionnaires and everything. So we would have known. But I mean, you're right. We don't have the ground truth. We don't have a camera. We don't have things like that.
The caregivers could probably provide some of that when they're in the homes too.
Yes. Yes. But I mean, since we go there, like for instance, for the previous thing, every 6 weeks we would go to these people's home and ask them to do the time-based scenarios for the notifications.
Can you explain that? You didn't explain that.
Oh, the
what
scenario?
the time-based scenario. Yeah, what the
Okay.
scenarios were.
Oh, sure. I should have. So we have two situations, okay, that we essentially play, okay, and we time them to see how much time they take to to achieve the scenario. So one scenario is the door is left open, okay, and so notification is going to come, and so we ask them, okay, what's happening? And they say, okay, there's a critical notification that's on the tablet, and they go check the notification, and they go close the door, and press OK, and it's timed like the timed IADL. It's the same. We were inspired by that to do this. Okay. And the other one is a doctor appointment. Okay, so a non-critical notification pops up on the tablet, and so again, what's going on and what should you do and blah blah. Okay, so this is interesting because I mean we haven't seen context-aware applications being actually executed, tested for almost real, in the sense that this is done on simulated, on actual logs, okay, actual data from people's home. Okay, so we have a more global kind of study going on, which is where we have 48 participants, 24 equipped, 24 non-equipped, 83 years old on average, and cognitive integrity. This is a study, a 9-month study with longitudinal effects, 6 and 9 months. And the measurements, we're looking at the efficacy, so prolonging aging in place, autonomy, well-being, cognitive and functional status, and also acceptability and usability of the platform. And we're working with our partners, funding partners like municipalities, regional authorities, the National Retirement Organization, and also the Regional Agency for Caregiving. And this is good because that means we work with professionals, and everything we do is essentially go through them to see if we're not doing anything bad. And actually we are also training the professional caregivers, which is also something very interesting because it's really important for them to kind of valuing their work, essentially, okay, and kind of showing that professional caregivers can be essentially expand their perimeter, and so they're quite pleased actually at participating in the study. Okay, future work. So we have some grant proposals in to see. So if they're funded, we're going to work on using the platform for people with MCI and early stage Alzheimer's disease. There's one grant we just got, which is to use our platform for individuals with intellectual disabilities, essentially to enable them to access to autonomy. So it's a different problem, really. Okay, it's really allowing them to become autonomous as opposed to people that are declining. But we thought it would be interesting as a way of leveraging what we have already. And also we're looking on some big project for population-based cohort studies with 500 people equipped and 500 people non-equipped. And yeah, that's just a project, but it's getting there. I mean, we have about funding for about 250 people. So it's worst comes to worst, it's going to be enough, statistically. And we have a project of a startup, like Aaron. Yeah, because this thing, essentially, a lot of our funding sponsors, they right from the beginning they told us, look, we don't fund research. We want to fund things that are going to make a difference in a practical way. So we understand you're researchers. We understand you have research problems that you want to study, but at the end of the day, we want something real for our customers. So that was part of the deal. It's like, okay, you go and experiment with this and see, make it as practical, as robust as you can, but when it reaches a certain point, you have to do something real for us. And so that was part of the deal. So we're getting to that point, and so in fact that large study is also connected to the startup project. Essentially, it's a way for them to actually kind of launch the thing. It's kind of if you do something on 500 people, chances are it's going to be robust enough so that the company can actually take this technology and do something real with it. And it makes sense. And that's it.
I thought that your approach was really interesting. I like the sketching that you use with the participants. I think that's actually a very clever idea and a way to get some real good information about what they do in their everyday lives. What are the different types? You talked about like grooming and cooking, and what's the variability in the types of different things that you're recognizing? Are you sticking to specific things that are routinized by a lot of different people, or are you getting into individual characteristics for different participants in your study?
It's more like standard activities, shower, like dressing, waking up at night to go to the bathroom, things like that. So we're really targeting certain activities. Our purpose is not to be wide spectrum, okay? It's really to say, okay, if we measure well some activity, some activities, let me put it differently. Some activities are easier to recognize than others, and there are good measures of functional cognitive functioning. Because we want this thing, so we have about 15 sensors that we're deploying at every home, okay? So it's not that much, okay? And in order to do that, you really need to pick, to select the right activities, the ones that are the most specific to some extent, that you can track more easily. So that's the choice we made, not to be wide spectrum, because again, I mean, this was part of the requirements again from our sponsors, was that we don't want something that costs $1 million. We don't care about that. We want something cheap so that we can sell. I mean, it can be affordable to lots of people. So right from the beginning, we knew that we didn't have that much of a budget for sensors.
Well, my question was similar. I was just wondering whether the sketching can be automated in the sense that if you tell people, this system will monitor 10 different activities. We'd like for you to run through them. And so, okay, first one is breakfast. Go, and it's all automated, and so your system is monitoring the sensors while they're doing this activity, possibly tweaking your model.
So then you would have some kind of a training, kind of machine learning approach, where you would train the system. Is that what you're thinking? Okay.
You can still basically use your model, which is similar across the population, but there might be some weights that could be modified.
Yeah, I believe there can be some kind of a midpoint between not knowing anything and knowing everything. So there can be some compromise there. I don't know how the things should be shifted between those two extreme or two ends. Okay, I think that would make sense. It's just that I've done a lot of research in programming languages, believe it or not, and and this is what we do. We do type verification, type inference. So I see an analogy there. Type inference is interesting when there's no ambiguity. When there is ambiguity, the problem is that it's very hard when you have tons of like a large program, okay? And there's some places where you can't infer the type, okay? And then the programmer has to step in, and it can be very complicated. Type checking, on the other hand, allows a programmer to think about types, okay, prior to actual programming, okay? So he says, here's what I think should happen. Here's what I think I should manipulate here. And there's intentional things there, okay? So it's much easier to actually do type verification because when something breaks, the programmer has already declared some intents, okay? So it goes really fast. So I guess, not that I don't like type inference, because in certain contexts it works just perfectly, okay? But verification is always powerful because the user or the programmer or whatever has done part of the job already for you. So I guess we kind of found a nice thing with my colleague who's working in psychology and aging because she said, well, we have those routines that older people are performing as they age, and I was like, yeah, verification looks like the right thing to do. Not, inferring is kind of I wouldn't say a waste of time. It's more complicated given that you have the information already. It's really knowledge driven in that regard. I mean, the knowledge is there, and it's just that this part of the population is routinized. So it's just leveraging this information that's there anyways. So we can guess it, but they're doing it already. So it's not as if we ask something of them. I mean, that's how they're kind of wired, if I may.
Well, I have one last question. What are you going to do with the 500 non-equipped homes?
In fact, this is an existing cohort that our colleague in the School of Medicine, and they already have this cohort, okay, and they are not equipped because, of course, this is prior to our stuff. Yeah. So we're not creating a cohort for the non-equipped. The cohort already exists, right. And they're following these people for cognitive decline, memory, and all that things. So this is already there. So I'm not sure I'm answering.
The hope or the hypothesis is that the equipped group will be more cognitively intact or more functionally independent?
Yes, okay. That's the idea, absolutely, yeah. I mean, because we're really counting on essentially cognitive stimulation through social participation, which apparently is a very effective way of stimulating cognitively older adults. So I mean, these are the kind of things we want to measure. It's like, and we will have, there is already, but we will have in this big cohort, we'll have ways in which we can stimulate them as far as social participation.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you again very much.
Thank you.